Welcome back to the Lydia McGrew channel and the rather long series that we're doing on the name statistics argument and the recent paper by Gregor and Blais dissenting from the name statistics argument. I'm continuing today to go over their alternative theories of ways that the Gospels might come to resemble reality, real name statistics at the place and time without actually being based on reality, by instead inventing persons. I mentioned the one I'm going to discuss today, I mentioned it briefly a few weeks ago, and it has to do with the lists of Jesus' brothers and of the 12, specifically in the Gospel of Mark, which they regard as the first gospel. So their theory is that the lists, these two lists, circulated separately from the Gospels and then were treated as sources. I'm going to read a brief quote here. One or both lists, regardless of whether itself fully authentic or at least partially invented based on, for example, the Maccabean names, might have been the go-to material to pull additional names for invented characters, not only for later gospel authors, but even for the author of the Gospel of Mark himself. Okay, you got that? So the idea is that these two lists might, for all we know, contain invented characters, but then that they circulated as oral traditions, and then the Gospels, the written Gospels, were based on those and sort of riffed on those names by making up additional invented characters based on those lists. So they include this along with the other ones that we've been talking about, like the Maccabean names and the Pauline epistles, as supposedly ways in which we could end up with the statistics we have right now, despite the invention of characters. Now, I can hear members of my audience already, regardless of whether skeptic or Christian, saying, well, the list of the 12 may have circulated separately in Christian oral tradition. That's plausible, that the list of the 12, a list of the 12, may have circulated separately from the written Gospels, because the 12 were very important to Christians. But we shouldn't ignore the tacit assumption here against traditional authorship and in favor of the notion that the actual authors of the Gospels were just kind of treating these as free-floating traditions and had no access of their own to who were the members of the 12, who were Jesus' brothers. The very fact that there are differences in the lists between Luke's list and Mark and Matthew's list shows that this isn't the case anyway, and John doesn't actually have a list. He mentions a number of members of the 12, but he doesn't have a list. As we've mentioned before, Luke has Judas, son of James, and doesn't use the name Thaddeus. They may have been the same person, but so he's got some independence there. Mark alone mentions that James and John were known as Boanerges, the sons of thunder. Mark alone mentions that it was in a list that it was Jesus who gave the name Peter to Simon, like that it was specifically bestowed by Jesus. In that, Mark agrees with John, but that bit of information doesn't occur in either of the other synoptics of Jesus actually saying, your name is Peter. So there's evidence throughout the Gospels that these weren't just, like, here's this list of the 12, and I'm someone coming a good deal later, and like, I don't know if these were really the 12 or not. I'm just going to grab this list and put it in here. We shouldn't just accept that unquestionably. I would also really question that a list of Jesus' brothers was by itself an important part of tradition. James, Jesus' brother, was prominent in the early church, and we do have a book of Jude that is attributed to Jesus' brother Jude, but there's no indication in Acts or in the canon, the canonical earliest documents, that either Simon or Joseph among Jesus' brothers were particularly important in the early church. It mentions that Jesus' brothers were there praying with the disciples, so evidently they had come to believe on him, but there's no other mention of Simon or Joseph. So the whole conjecture that this list of Jesus' brothers, was out there and passed on orally like it was this big important thing, I think is dubious. All right. Now, Gregor and Blais are using the list of the 12 in Mark and the list of Jesus' brothers in Mark via two different epicycles. And this is really the central major problem with what they're doing here. The information in those lists is part of the data to be explained. It's not a separate explanation, like how did the Gospels end up with the name statistics that they had? Well, they were based on the list of the 12. The name statistics that the Gospels have partly consists of the lists of the 12. So, and in a way, Gregor and Blais sort of kind of realize this. So they create two different epicycles. They say they, know that they're contesting a bunch of these people, even in the lists of the 12 and Jesus' brothers. But then they say, well, maybe it was itself based upon the Maccabean list. You heard that when I quoted it. At least partially invented based on, for example, the Maccabean names. And so it's like, well, somehow these two lists, waves hands, are emphasizing or including more of the names that were actually popular. Okay? Somehow that worked out. Maybe they're based on the Maccabean names. And so that gets into tradition, and then separately, the authors of the Gospels pull from that tradition further to invent more people. So this isn't actually a separate explanation. It's not a separate source, because it has to have a way to get made up people in there which end up mimicking the historical popularity anyway. Now, that's why I did a discussion of the Maccabean idea already, previous to this video, because I realized this is actually just a further piggyback theory, piggybacking on the Maccabean theory. Remember that, as we discussed last time, the Maccabean books don't contain, of course, any indication that those names are going to be popular later on. So for the authors of the Gospels, or the people who, according to them, made up, in part, the members of the 12 and the names of Jesus' brothers, they would have to have figured out that Maccabean names were popular at the time, and then pulled from them to give their made-up people. And really, that just amounts to their accumulating name statistics on their own, and it even makes it harder, because then you've got to have the separate step where you go, oh, look, that resembles Maccabean names even more than Old Testament names. So then when you go to make up people, you make up Maccabean names rather than Old Testament names that are not Maccabean names. So it's terrible explanation. So they've got this terrible attempted explanation that's like at the start of the whole thing. Then you have oral tradents, as they're sometimes called, who are inventing people in that highly implausible way. And then you have further people who are the authors of the Gospels, who for some reason are treating those lists as plausibly sources of historical names and making up more people. And it's very worth asking, if these are different sets of people, why would the Gospel authors themselves even think to say, I think I'm going to make up more people with names of the 12 because they're probably popular? Or are we supposed to think that they just kind of venerated those people and made them made up further people, in which case you could ask, well, why are you making up, more Simons instead of making up, I don't know, more Thaddeus's? So it's just an improbable explanation tacked on to another improbable explanation. If the list of the 12 and the list of Jesus' brothers containing contested persons appear to favor historicity by corresponding to the most popular names, this should be to the credit of the canonical Gospels. Even if the authors weren't personally present during Jesus' ministry, Luke and Mark in traditional authorship would not have been personally present, the authors are getting lists that have an appearance of historicity. That's not separable from gospel reliability. That's part of gospel reliability. That even if you're getting your information from someone else, you're getting good information. So you can't separate that out. And they put it in a chart, okay, of supposed, considerations by which the authors of the Gospels themselves could have made up names, when this is actually part of the Gospels themselves. Now, here's another aspect of what makes all of this so weird and so implausible. No names occur twice within the list of Jesus' brothers. There's only, a small number of brothers, and of course he didn't have, 2 brothers named Simon. He had 1 brother named Simon. If this theory were correct, that the list of Jesus' brothers is circulating separately from the Gospels, the list of the apostles is, the 12 is circulating separately, it's even more conjectural that these 2 lists circulated together with one another. So how is the list of the brothers supposed to help? We have to be imagining someone looking at the list of the brothers and comparing it to the list of the 12 and saying, even though there's only 1 Jude over here in this list and only 1 Jude in Mark over in the list of the 12, put those together, that's 2, so maybe they were more popular. Maybe Jude was more popular. I'm going to make up more Judes. Or even though there's, only 1 Simon in the list of Jesus' brothers, I'm going to put that together with the list of the 12. Now I've got 3 because there are 2 Simons in the list of the 12. Wow, maybe that was a really popular name, so now I'm going to make up more Simons. So you have to bring those lists together. They have to be separate from the Gospels, but together with one another in order for a person to be trying to draw, popularity conclusions from them. It's very, very improbable. Now, there's a couple more points here. There is no Joseph in the 12. Okay, in neither of the lists of the 12 is there someone named Joseph. And there is only 1 Joseph listed as a brother of Jesus. So this implausible theory isn't even relevant to the appropriate number of Josephs found in the Gospels and Acts. And then similarly, there's only 1 John in the list of the 12, and there is no John among Jesus' brothers. So again, this theory isn't even relevant to, it doesn't even have an appearance of relevance to the number of people named John. It's really no surprise that these lists and Maccabean characters converge on the most popular names. So after putting these into a chart with Maccabean characters and the epistles of Paul and the MacDonald doublets, Gregor and Blais make this comment like, wow, it's really noteworthy that these converge on the most popular names, both in, reality and in the Gospels. Well, first of all, we've still got the issue of Lazarus, who doesn't appear in any of these places. I mentioned that concerning Maccabees, because Eleazar was a Maccabean name. But aside from that, it's no surprise that they converge. They've gerrymandered an idea that the list of the 12 and of Jesus' brothers was partially fictionalized based on the Maccabean names. Okay? And they pulled those things out of the credit of the Gospels, and they've said maybe they were made up based on this other improbable idea about figuring out that the Maccabean names were popular. Now we put them into a chart, and we say, oh, gee, what an amazing thing. They converge on the same names. Yeah, because you gerrymandered it to converge on the same names. Moreover, reality makes as much sense and even better sense because it is, as Balcom and Ilan have noted, a reality that the Maccabean names were popular at the time. That appears to have been a cultural influence of the time. So if, Simon the Canaanian, for example, was a real person, or Judas Iscariot, a real person, or Judas, son of James, their parents may be real persons who were given the names they were given, and lying back of that causally somewhere is the popularity of the Maccabean names. So, yeah, these things converge. Reality is as good as, and indeed better, an explanation of the convergence of these, because the gospel statistics, I would argue, are based on reality. So in no way does putting these into a chart and then saying, hey, wow, what an amazing thing, they all converge, favor invention in any way. All right, now, none of these theories that I've discussed thus far even meet a sort of a first hurdle for explaining away the data in some fictional way. What first hurdle do I have in mind? Okay, the first hurdle I have in mind is that if you want to have some source, okay, that the authors could have drawn upon and gotten a good idea of real name statistics, if they'd worked really hard at it, and then use those real name statistics to invent people, it has to be separable from the Gospels, like an actual separate thing. It has to have enough data that it actually gives you a good idea of the actual name statistics, okay? And it has to be accessible to the authors. Well, I've gone over a bunch of theories so far, and none of them even meet this first hurdle. And meeting that first hurdle doesn't even make it a plausible theory, as we'll see next time. But this is just like what they call a Pons Asinorum, the bridge of asses. You got to get, bridge of donkeys. You got to get across this first bridge to even get started. Pauline epistles don't meet that. The Pauline epistles, as we saw, they only have 3 names of religious leaders, Christian leaders in Jerusalem. One of these names is Peter, which isn't a popular name anyway. Then we have one person he mentions named John, and one person he mentions named James, and nothing in the Pauline epistles gives you any clue that those 2 are especially popular. This is very, very lame. I went over the Maccabean thing last time, that looking at the Maccabean names doesn't really tell you anything about popularity at the Palestinian period, the period of Christ, so you'd have to be doing your brute name statistics anyway. We talked about the spin-off lists today, and we talked about the McDonald doublets. That one's a real doozy, because they don't favor popular names particularly, except in an ex post facto fashion. That is to say, if we have 2 Phillips, even though that's not a popular name, we could make up a McDonald doublet theory about 2 different Phillips. I did that on that video. If there happened to have been 2 Thaddeus's fulfilling the roles that are in a McDonald doublet of being Jesus' disciple and denying him, on the one hand carrying his cross on the other, then you could make up a McDonald doublet about 2 Thaddeus's. So in no way does this raise the probability that the Gospels will contain popular names in line with actual name statistics. So it's a completely unexplanatory theory. So far, what we've examined, it doesn't even get to that first step. It doesn't even get across that first bridge. Next time, I'll finally be talking about something where you could have at least separate data on name statistics, and that's Josephus. I'll get to that next time. I won't say now what I have to say about that. I certainly don't think that provides a good alternative to reality explanation, but it does at least pass this first bridge. So I hope you'll come back next time. My expectation is that the next presentation will be the last on the gospel name statistics argument, which I hope that you have found enjoyable. Even though it's been long, there's just so much wrong with Gregor and Blais' paper that it's taken a while to spell it all out. I hope to see you next time here at the Lydia Migger channel, where we're making common sense rigorous.